सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। Om Tat Sat. Om Namah Shivaya. My name is Ravi. I work with the Shivananda Ashram, and today I am going to discuss the role of a guru in our spiritual progress. The word guru has become very fashionable nowadays. You hear words like he is a stock market guru or he is a tech guru, indicating that the person has extensive knowledge of that subject. So that is the general meaning of the word guru today, a person who has an extensive mastery over a subject is called a guru in that subject. But the word guru, with regard to the Shastram, it's got a very specific connotation. The word itself can be broken into two smaller words, gu and ru. Gu standing for darkness and ru standing for the remover of the darkness. And therefore, guru is the one who removes the darkness. How do you remove darkness? There is only one way, by bringing in light. There is no other way of removing darkness. But when you bring in light, that itself is sufficient to remove the darkness. Nothing else is necessary. Nothing further needs to be done. The darkness goes by itself when light is brought. In the context of Shastram, this darkness is compared to Ajnana, and therefore the same method applies. You bring in knowledge and ignorance goes by itself. No other action, nothing more needs to be done. No amount of karma and upasana will bring in jnana. This is something which we all have to be clear about. Let me give an example. Say you are not a physics student and you come to me and say that, I want to learn the meaning of E is equal to mc squared. So I tell you, okay, you will first clean the floors for 1 week and do selfless service, and then you will understand. So you come and clean the floors for a week. At the end of the week, do you know what the equation means? No. All you have got is a cleaner floor. That itself has value. I'm not saying no, but you have not achieved your objective. Okay. Then you come to me again and I say, all right, you do japa. Take a japa mala and repeat E is equal to mc squared 10,000 times. So you do that. At the end of that, what has happened? You got focus. Your mind is clear and focused. But the meaning of that equation is still hidden from you. You come to me again and I say, okay, this is the final stage. You meditate deeply on the equation and go into samadhi. So you do that. Will that reveal the meaning to you? No. Why? Because understanding of the individual components of that equation, E, M and C, are not there. And simply by doing karma or japa or meditation, how will that knowledge come to you? There is only one way for you to understand that equation. I have to explain to you what is the meaning of E, what is the meaning of C, what is the meaning of M. And after I explain to you, you will understand that the equation tells you that energy and matter are interconvertible. What has removed the ignorance about the equation? My explaining to you, which is knowledge. And therefore, knowledge alone removes ignorance. Nothing else can. Of course, this should not be construed as looking down upon karma and upasana. They are all extremely important sadhana. Indeed, without them, knowledge cannot be obtained, because these two sadhanas, these karma and this upasana, they prepare your mind. It's like training for the Wimbledon. You live a disciplined life, you eat well, you train daily, you sleep well. You keep doing that, and finally you are prepared. Your body is fit, you've got enough skills, but all that is only preparation, right? And preparation alone is not enough to give you the championship. You have to actually play the matches and be better than all the other competitors. Then only you will win the match. Training is very important, but you will not win till you play. And you can't play till you are trained. So that, dependability, that interdependence is there. Karma and upasana similarly are necessary and important sadhana. It makes your mind fit for understanding the knowledge. But to get knowledge, you have to come to a teacher. And without that knowledge, you will not get moksha. Therefore, without the karma and upasana, which is the fitness of the mind, you cannot come to jnanam. And karma and upasana alone, without coming to jnanam, is incomplete sadhana. And therefore, first, karma upasana, a purified mind, chitta shuddhi, and then coming to jnanam and getting moksha. So where is this jnanam? Where is it available? The primary scriptures for us are Veda. All other texts, all other scriptures, secondary scriptures are only expanded versions. And the Veda has two parts, the Purva Veda and the Veda Anta, also called Karma Kanda and Jnana Kanda. This Purva Veda, this Karma Kanda, it deals with the disciplined lifestyle, by following which I can be happy and peaceful. And this is through all those rituals, which basically are karma and upasana that I was mentioning earlier. It's interesting to note that the major chunk of the Vedas, the majority of the Vedas, they deal with karma and upasana, thus indicating that the sadhana of karma and upasana is considered very, very important for a spiritual seeker. However, because the major part of the Veda deals with that, people misunderstand karma and upasana to be the final goal. And therefore, you have a variety of spiritual teachers recommending different sadhana as the means of liberation. People recommend Hatha Yoga, people recommend Kundalini Yoga, people recommend Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, Dhyana Yoga. And Shankaracharya very clearly says, yes, these are all extremely important sadhanas, but each of them has a different objective. So karma and upasana, what is the objective? It is to bring you to a certain composure of mind, which we call chitta shuddhi, a certain resolution of mind, after which alone one can absorb jnanam. And that jnanam will give you moksha. How will karma and upasana bring you to jnanam? It's very beautifully given in a verse in the Mundaka Upanishad, which I will quote. Pariksha lokat karma chitan brahmanaha nirvedamayan nastakrita kritena. So pariksha, an extremely important word. Examination. May you experiment with karma and upasana. All the karma we are talking about refers to the Vaidika karma mentioned in the Veda. Pariksha is examination with all the sources of knowledge, which we call pramanam, available to you. So pratyaksha, anumana, upamana, Agami, Agama. With all these, you should use all these sources of knowledge, all these pramanam, you should, to get the correct meaning out of the Shastra. And therefore, that's very important too. You should be guided by Shastra. Having done that, this seeker who is examining karma and upasana will come to the conclusion that whatever can be attained through finite means can only be finite. And therefore the Upanishad says, Brahmanaha nirvedam ayat. Nirvedam, detachment, vairagyam. And this represents what we call sadhana chatushtaya sampattihi, chitta shuddhi. This basic resolution of mind, the quietness of mind, which I was talking about. This is what the Upanishad says. First, the seeker must get. And how does he get this detachment? Nasti akrita kritena. By understanding that akritaha, moksha, is not possible kritena, through karma. Once he comes to this stage, he begins to understand that there is a path for him which is different from the one he has walked so far. Then what should he do? The Upanishad says, Tad vijnanartham sa gurum eva vigachit. He should go to an appropriate guru, the one who can give him jnanam and thereby dispel his ignorance. So this particular verse itself indicates these two stages. First, karma upasana, bring a certain resolution to your mind, get chitta shuddhi, the quietness of the mind, the purity of the mind, and then go to the guru for jnana. So this is where the guru comes in. So Veda Purva, remember, it doesn't create a jnani. Veda Purva creates the seeker, the sadhaka, the purified sadhaka, whom we call adhikari, the one who is eligible to get jnana. And Veda Anta converts that adhikari into a jnani. Jnani is the knower. Knower of what? Atma Jnana. And before we start studying Atma Jnanam, we should have clarity regarding what is Atma Jnana. So there is a special feature of Atma Jnanam which we should know. What is that? Normally, I am the knower and there is an object to be known. Right? If I am studying, say, biology, I am the knower, one who wants to know. And the objects, the biological objects, are what is thought to be known. But in Atma Jnanam, the peculiarity is that the one who seeks to know is the same as that which is thought to be known. The object is also the subject. And therefore, in Atma Jnanam, I am the subject and I am the object. So normally, how do I acquire any knowledge? Through the use of my various sources of knowledge. So pramanam, we say eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin. Right? These are my sense organs. Through these I acquire knowledge. These 5 sense organs, they are all turned outside. They all operate on the object and they cannot be turned inside. And that is why they cannot operate upon me. It's like saying that my eyes should see themselves. That is simply not possible. If I is the subject, everything else is the object. The eye can never be the subject. And hence my sense organs are useless for this search. They cannot help me to know myself. And therefore no material science can help, because all material sciences are based on sensory data. Right? So to use the example of my eyes. If I want to see my eyes, what do? I use a mirror. The eyes are turned outwards and the mirror helps me to see not my original eye, but the reflection of my eye. And Shastram says, similarly, to see who you are, to understand who you are, one needs external help like the mirror. And as far as Shastram is concerned, this Shastram itself is the mirror. And one therefore needs to remember that when we are studying Shastram, the scriptures are serving as a mirror. And what is being reflected? When I look at the mirror, I'm appearing to look outside, right? But actually, I am looking at my own eyes. Similarly, when I am studying Shastram, it may seem that I am studying outside, I'm looking outside, but the Shastram is showing me my own self. And therefore, the Shastric study, the scriptural study, is the same as self inquiry. The study shows me my own true nature. Vedantic study may seem like an activity directed outwards, but what I am seeing is my own self. And there is a special problem associated with the study of the scriptures. What is that? Let us say I am studying physics and I read about the law of gravitation, right? That knowledge is available to me from the book, the physics book. Who wrote the physics book? Some physicist. Where did he get the knowledge from? If you go back, you will find that Newton was the first person who arrived at this law of gravitation. How did Newton arrive at the law? He got the knowledge using his sense organs. The point I'm trying to make, this physics book, it is not producing knowledge. It is just carrying on the knowledge which has been gathered by Newton by the use of his sense organs. And therefore, the physics book is not a producer of knowledge. Those words are only the carrier of knowledge. And this is an extremely important distinction. The Upanishads, the words in the Upanishads, they are not carriers of knowledge, unlike the physics book. The rishis have not gathered the knowledge through the use of some pramanam and converted into words like Newton did. The Upanishads produce a very unique knowledge which cannot be gathered by any other method. And therefore we say that the Upanishads are not like other texts, other worldly texts. The Upanishads produce the knowledge themselves, unlike the worldly texts which are only carriers of knowledge. So what is this? This knowledge is not about an external subject, but about your own self. And I have to be able to see this. What the Upanishad is saying about me. What is the role of the teacher, of the guru? He creates an environment in the class, the Gurukulam. It is such an environment in which he uses arguments, logical arguments also, because of which you are pushed into a corner. And from that corner, there is no choice for you but to see what the Guru is asking you to see. Remember, he is not creating something new for you to see, but he is like the eye surgeon. He removes the cataract and therefore your eyes begin to see again. He has not given you any new eyes. He has just removed the covering from the eyes, the cataract from the eyes, thus enabling the eyes to function as they are supposed to function. Therefore, the scriptures have to be understood and read in such a way that they give me this knowledge. And this is pointed out in a very famous verse from the Guru Stotra. It says, Ajnana timirandhasya jnananjala chalakaya chakshurun militam yenam tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Salutations to my Guru. For what? Unmilitam, for opening the Jnana Chakshu, for opening the eyes. Jnana Chakshu is the knowledge eyes, the divine eyes. How does he open? Anjana Chalakaya, by applying the ointment of Jnana. So this is the importance of the Guru. Only he can make you see. And for him to be able to teach you, three conditions have to be there. You have to be mentally prepared. So that is in your hands. That's what I said, Chitta Shuddhi part. Then the Guru himself must know Atma Jnana. He has to have the method of communication also. So the two important points, the Guru himself must know, because he can only make you see what he himself sees. That is one. Such a Guru who knows, who is Atma Jnani himself, is called a Brahma Nishtha. And there is the second most important thing, he also has to have the appropriate traditional method of communication. He should be able to communicate to you, and he can communicate to you only if he himself has been taught in that manner. The second portion is referred to as Shrotriya, and therefore the Guru who is the right Guru for a person, that Guru has to be both Shrotriya and Brahmanistha. He himself must be a Jnani. You can have a Guru who is just Brahmanistha. So he's a Jnani. But if he has not got the proper traditional teaching, he has not learned the method of communication, then even though he is a Jnani, it's unlikely that he will be able to communicate that to you. And therefore such Gurus, we have many in our tradition who themselves are Jnanis, but we are not able to understand what they are saying. They are called mystics. Mystic, we salute, we worship, because he is a Jnani, but that mystic is not good for teaching me Jnana, because he himself has not learnt in the proper traditional manner. He doesn't know the method of communication, and therefore he is unable to teach. What if he is a good teacher, he has learnt the scripture properly under a traditional teacher, but yet because of some reason he is not a Jnani? Then also it is not good enough, because he doesn't know with conviction that he is Atma. How can he show you what he himself does not see? And therefore the combination of these two, Shrotriya and Brahmanistha, is necessary for a proper Guru. Because of this, the Guru has to be a very, very special person. He has to have Atma Jnana. He has to be complete in himself. He is Purna. And there is nothing in life that he needs to do. So these are the indications that you look out for. This person is not driven by any ambition. There is nothing that he needs to do, because he has fulfilled the purpose of his life, which is what? Which is to become a Jnani, which is to get moksha. Then you may ask, in that case, why should he teach? Okay, this is a good question. Why should the Guru teach? So he will teach out of pure compassion. And there is a very important, point here, that unlike the teacher of worldly knowledge, a physics teacher, for example, it's called Laukika Jnana, worldly knowledge. He's a teacher, you're a student. That relationship is there in class. And at the most, it will last throughout your school and college days. And after that, it will slowly fade away, because the knowledge is there with you and you are unlikely to remember the teacher all the time. That is the way worldly knowledge is. But the relationship between the Guru and the Shishya is different, because the knowledge which the Guru gives you is not like the knowledge of physics or the knowledge of biology. It's not the knowledge of an external science. It is the knowledge of who you are. And therefore, this relationship is more like the relationship between a therapist and his patient. For For a relationship between a therapist and patient to work, what is needed? Trust is needed, time is needed. And therefore, the Shishya has to trust the Guru and he has to give sufficient time. Why sufficient time? Because we as Shishyas, we have many preconceptions which we have picked up over our life. What is Atma? What is Moksha? Who am I? What are my relationships? There are hundreds and hundreds of preconceptions. And the preconceptions have first to be removed. You can't fill a glass which is already full. Therefore, the glass has to be first emptied by the Guru and then the fresh teaching given. So the Guru has to remove the student's misconceptions which have given him a bad self-image, and then he must teach the Shishya to totally accept himself. Most of us in this world, fortunately or unfortunately, are conditioned to accept ourselves only if someone else loves us. How does he do that? How does he teach the student to accept himself? How is it possible for him? Because of the Atma Jnanam, the Guru sees himself as totally acceptable to himself. Why? Because Atma Jnanam is what? It tells him that he, the Guru, is the very manifestation of Ishvara, the Lord. And how can the Lord be not acceptable to anyone? And this is what Shastra conveys, that you are the Lord and you are completely acceptable to yourself. You are completely lovable. And this is what Shastra conveys. Shastram conveys this. And the Guru teaches you this. And that is why I said that in the class, the Guru creates an environment where you are pushed into a position from where you cannot help but see that you are totally lovable, that you are totally acceptable to yourself. It is very important that your self-image has to be improved upon till you see yourself as completely and unconditionally acceptable to yourself. What does it mean? I am 100% acceptable to myself. Also means that what somebody else thinks of me will not influence my understanding of myself as completely lovable, completely acceptable. So you can see that teaching the Shastra is not a profession. You cannot have the same relationship of someone selling a service and someone buying one. And that is why in all traditional teaching schools, there is no money involved in the process. There is no money involved in the teaching. No traditional teacher will turn down a student because he has no money. In fact, they don't ask. That's why it's called Dakshina. Whatever you pay, whatever you can afford, you pay not because you have to, but out of gratitude. That's one. And therefore, the teacher is like also a mother. It's very important comparison here. A lady has a choice to be a mother or not to be a mother. Right? As a lady, I can choose. I want a child, I don't want a child. But once I choose to be a mother and become one, the choice of not being a mother is no longer available. The moment I have chosen to be a mother, that choice has gone. I cannot then say that, I don't want to be a mother. The guru is something like that. The guru can choose not to teach. Right? He can say that I don't want to teach. So there are many jnanis in India who are living in, let us say, Himalayan caves and all that, and they choose not to teach. So that choice is theirs. But once the guru says, yes, I shall teach, and once he accepts a student as a shishya, he cannot back out of that relationship, just like the mother. There is no backing out after a child is born. There is no backing out after a student has been accepted. The guru has no choice but to teach. When does a guru become a guru? The onus lies on the student. Until the shishya asks for the teaching, the guru-shishya relationship is not born. So if you remember the story of the Mahabharata, Arjuna and Krishna were friends for several years. But Arjuna never addressed Krishna as his teacher. It is only on the battlefield that Arjuna asked Krishna to teach him, and on the battlefield, the guru was born. Krishna, the guru, was born. So once the shishya asks, the guru has to agree. Then only guru-shishya sambandha relationship is born. And because of the very nature of this knowledge, the jnanam, the guru does not teach for money or for power or for control. Why then does he teach? He teaches because a competent shishya, adhikari we call it, competent adhikari has asked for the teaching, and therefore there is no reason not to teach. And Shankaracharya points out elsewhere that it is the intent of the Shastram that if a competent student asks for the teaching, if an adhikari asks for the teaching, it is the dharma of the teacher to give that teaching. He has no choice to refuse the teaching. How long shall he teach? Until the shishya sees. Sees what? That he is Brahman, that he is Atma. And now you can see why the guru is such a respected figure in our tradition. We respect our teachers, even of worldly sciences. How much more a guru who has given you total freedom? And we acknowledge this guru by acknowledging that he is the Lord himself, which is why we say Gururu Brahma, Gururu Vishnu, Gururu Devo Maheshwaraha, Gururu Evam Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. With this I'll stop. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamadachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat. Om Namah Shivaya. Thank you for your patience.